Welcome back to the Bates College Museum of Art podcast. I'm your host, Morgan, and your assistant education curator. And this week I'm joined with Professor Bill Wallace. Bill, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bill Wallace, and I teach in the education department. And I've been here at Bates since 2012. And I teach in the ed department some of the traditional courses and courses that tend to lean in the direction of science and STEM issues, like creating educational experiences in Morris Mountain, which is a short-term class, and teaching in the sciences, which is regular school year class.
And a little background on how I know Bill. I actually was able to take Bill's teaching in the sciences class this semester, fall 2024, and I got to experience how he sort of structures his classes and also the interactions that he has with the museum's collection. And so, Bill, if you could talk a little bit about how you interact with the museum and maybe how you feel it impacts your students and maybe why you keep coming back.
Yeah, so I started using the museum and all of the great folks that are associated with the museum back in fall of 2018. And at that time, it was through the class teaching in the sciences. And I was looking for some way where we could probably connect science with art. Very often, students that are taking science classes, maybe they don't naturally connect with science. They may be a more artistic type or creative type. And this isn't so much the Bates students, but since my course is teaching in the sciences, and a lot of the Bates students that take this class are going to go on and teach science, just thought for them it's another tool in the toolbox that would allow them to be looking at that course and science topics maybe in a different way. So we arranged to have a tour of the museum back in the fall 2018, and Anthony Shostak, who led the tour, as the closing moment of the tour, he brought out 3 paintings. And right now, I don't remember the name of the artist, but Morgan, you remember.
Mm-hmm. Isabel Kirkland. If you go to museum.bates.edu, you can actually view those photos through our online database if you're interested, or you can come in and we can pull them out for you anytime, but they are pretty amazing images.
Yeah, so they were beautiful, and they also told a story of extinction, biodiversity, invasive species, in a very beautiful, artistic way, but a very strong science message in the same way. So that was really the kickoff for me, the first time that I had brought students in, and to see them in a different environment than classroom. And they really, students are always looking for a change of pace, and to have one that's so productive for them and challenging in a new way, other than the way we had from day to day. So that was probably the first time. Should I talk about some of the others?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, then probably that same year, that same academic year, in the spring, so this would have been spring 2019, I was putting together a short-term class called Creating Educational Experiences at Morris Mountain. And this course is based around taking Bates students down to the coast, Phippsburg, Maine, to our coastal campus, and orienting them to the natural and human history in that area. And that usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks. And this is back when short term was 5 full weeks rather than the shortened version we have now. And then the final 2 weeks were a series of field trips that the Bates students would give for K to 5 students at Phippsburg Elementary School. And then we actually did a field trip on campus at Bates with the Lewiston Middle School, all their eighth graders. So what I did, I combined again with Anthony, and Anthony had his art intern at the time, and I don't remember her name right now, lead a nature sketching class down at Shortridge at Morse Mountain with my 22 students that I had in the Creating Educational Experiences class. So we did a hike first, and then we did a couple of hours of sketching, and then we showed one another what we had been doing in sketching, what we were trying to create. And this actual activity of doing the nature sketching was going to be part of all the field trips that we were going to do at the end of the short term on those final field trips we did with young kids. And then, I was just sold from then on that I looked at exhibits that were going to be shown at the museum and just found some way to connect my classes each semester with at least one class time at the museum. So some of my students now have been to the museum 3 times in the several classes that they've taken with me. And it's always been worthwhile and a good change of pace. And the staff's always so skillful at presenting to the students and engaging them.
Thank you for that. That's what we always like to hear at the museum is the cross disciplinary ways that we can engage with students, whether they're education majors or science STEM based thinkers. We love to have all kinds of different learners in the museum, or even K to 5 students. So that was really awesome. Thank you. Another question I have is a little bit about your background before you came to Bates. Tell us about your educational background and how you kind of ended up here.
Sure. Well, this is my 45th year teaching. So 34 of those years were spent in secondary school education, so teaching at 2 boarding schools. So I was 18 years at Hebron Academy, which is just a little bit west of here, out in Hebron, Maine, getting out towards Norway and South Paris. And then St. Andrew's School for 16 years down in Middletown, Delaware. What I did at those places, I mean, honestly, I got involved in teaching because I loved coaching. And I swam when I was in college, and I thought maybe what I was going to do was just be a professional coach. But I found that that was kind of a difficult path to make enough money just coaching. Whereas if you taught, particularly if you taught at a place like a boarding school like Hebron Academy or St. Andrew's School, you always had a ready supply of students who were going to be on your swim team each year. And I also coached soccer, and I coached girls lacrosse. And I loved dorm life, and I had students there. I taught chemistry, biology, environmental science, and conceptual physics in my career, and just loved engaging students, not only in the lab and in the class, but then having them later on in the day and coaching them and seeing them in a new and different challenging environment. I myself, I went to a small private day school from 6th grade on to 12th in Rhode Island, Providence Country Day School. Then went to the University of Maine in Orono, and I majored in wildlife management and a minor in fisheries biology. Then I went over to the Peace Corps, was in the Peace Corps for 2 years in the Philippines, doing aquaculture work, in particular rice fish culture. And then when I came back, that's when I started pursuing a teaching and coaching career. And then I think I might have mentioned to the class, this fall, Morgan, that I didn't go right into graduate school right out of college. I mean, I think it was, so I graduated in 1977, and I started my graduate program at the University of Delaware in 2002. And,
That was the year I was born.
oh, okay, that puts things in perspective. And when I was at U Delaware, I did my research for my degree, for my master's in groundwater resources in the state, um, because Delaware doesn't really have the lakes and rivers that Maine has. Most of their rivers are tidal rivers, so the water is brackish to fresh water. So their water that they have for their population and for irrigating crops comes from the ground. And I didn't know much about that. And I didn't know much. I didn't have a big background in hydrology. So I decided that's what I was going to research, and learned a lot doing it. Had some great professors in my program. So it was really good. It was challenging doing that at the same time that I was teaching, raising a young family, and coaching.
Hmm.
But it was really worth it. It was great.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think your maybe non-traditional background of how you came to education really informs how you structure your classes. As one of your students, and also having seen you bring students into the museum, I feel like you're always looking for ways to connect to kids that isn't always lecture textbook based, or reading and writing,
Right.
which I really appreciate about you as an educator. And I think that's why your classes work so well with how we function at the museum, because we are trying to approach education in that way as well. It's really interesting. I didn't know that you served in the Peace Corps.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was pretty good because even though I had a really good background in fisheries biology from the University of Maine, it was largely in cold water species. And the fish that we worked with in the Philippines were all warm water species like milkfish, tilapia, carp.
Mhm.
So they behave differently, and their role in the Philippines is very, very different from the role of like lake trout and salmon and trout and bass, like in Maine, which are largely sport fish,
Yeah.
and not so much of the salmon because they're an endangered species, but the fish in the Philippines were all food fish, and they were all, I guess, originally they came from the natural world, but most of them were cultivated in fish ponds.
Oh, wow.
So my particular area of expertise there, if I could say it was expertise, because I was learning right until the last day I was there, was on rice fish culture, where we teach a farmer who was raising primarily rice how to modify his rice paddies so that he could be raising tilapia in addition to
Wow.
raising rice. So they would go through, and before they harvested the rice, at probably about 120 days, they could harvest the fish.
Hmm.
The fish would grow from fingerling size to probably about 8 inches long in
Wow.
that amount of time. And so they'd harvest a protein source as well as a carbohydrate source. So,
That is awesome. Wow. So
yeah,
I didn't know any of that. That's super cool.
maybe I should have shared that. Getting back to your observation about how I have different approaches to the
Hmm.
class, I think a a lot of my teaching early in my career, and since I've arrived at Bates, came to Bates in 2012, um, I've made it a point to visit other professors.
Hmm.
And earlier in my career, when I was at Hebron and at St. Andrew's School, we were encouraged to visit one another's class, and I was always um, impressed at the imagination that some of my colleagues were bringing in. And I made it a point not to just visit other people teaching sciences, but rather, um, like here at Bates, maybe going to the theater and dance program and seeing how some of the dance professors organize their classes, which is very, very different from the way
Right.
I did it, and maybe a lot more effective in some ways. So tried to wrap some of that um, into my classes. And one of the things that I saw, this was back a few years ago, one of the dance professors, Julie Fox, one of the things that I saw her doing was a much more collaborative approach than I was used to doing in my class. So she would get together with the students before class, and they'd all be sitting on the floor stretching, and she'd have just a little slip of paper, and she'd be going over a checklist of things that she wanted to see them do.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very performance based, as dance is. And I went, gee, maybe that's a little bit better way of approaching things, particularly at the college level here at Bates. With my class, it probably would be a lot better off for them to be demonstrating what they're learning rather than just writing a paper or something like that. That's why the idea of the curriculum units
Yeah.
and the 5-minute classes
Mm-hmm.
and actually demonstrating mastery and talking about different aspects of your projects that maybe you have questions about that you don't feel quite as strong about, and others that you think are really effective. I think that all comes from trying to collaborate with colleagues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's really awesome insight. Thank you. Um, I guess maybe another question that I have for you. Um, so how does art, in whatever way that means to you, maybe influence your personal life or the way that you, I guess, maybe think about education as a whole? I mean, you touched on that a little bit, but just digging deeper into that.
Yeah, I guess in my personal life, a lot of art to me is what I experience in nature.
Mm.
And as I shared with you, Morgan, I do quite a bit of photography, although not as much as I should be doing. But I have a Canon D40 camera, take a lot of photos outdoors with those. And what I like about digital photography, because I go way back to regular traditional um, wet photography, is that you can take 100 pictures and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't cost you anything. But back with with the wet photography, um, you'd have to send your rolls of film in to get printed, and it costs you $13 or $14, and you get two good
Yeah.
pictures out of the bunch. Um, so I really like that. I like seeing the beauty and the wonder of um, how the natural world does stuff. Like Don and I live out in Minot, so we have about a 1 acre yard, but then we have 14 acres of woodlot
Mm-hmm.
around that's um, just beautiful, and it looks different every day when we walk through there each day with the dogs. But in terms of teaching and the importance of art day to day in class, um, I think education's all about creativity. It's not about creating in a student's brain a sort of file cabinet of information, but it's learning things and applying what they learn in a bunch of novel situations.
Mm-hmm.
And that creativity, I think, some people have a little bit more of it than others, but it can be cultivated, just like an athletic talent.
Absolutely.
And I think that art belongs in everybody's life because it's very often important to get to know, or either in person or get to know um, through literature about the lives of some of these artists, and find out how they perceive the world
Mm-hmm.
and what experiences led them to perceiving the world in the way they did.
Yeah.
Um, so that that kind of in a nutshell has evolved. I come from a family of artists. My mom and dad weren't artists, but my aunt and uncle on the other side of the family were. So my Uncle Tom was the dean of the College of Art out at Michigan State University,
Oh wow.
and then later taught in Boston. So that side of the family's done a lot of art,
Mm-hmm.
and my cousin Peter continues to be a political cartoonist down in the Boston area. So um, maybe some of that's rubbed off. Um,
Definitely. Well, you are also a former teacher of a very prominent musical artist. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
yeah, so back in 2012, 2012, let's see, no, 2008,
Hmm.
when I was teaching at St. Andrew's School, teaching chemistry, among other things. Um, in my daughter's class, my daughter Selena's my younger daughter, my older daughter is Lindsay. She's the one who graduated from Bates. But I had a young woman in my chemistry class by the name of Maggie Rogers. And Maggie was very smart, very athletic, really good lacrosse player. She was on my lacrosse team in addition. Um, and then, she was in chemistry and liked it and liked all her classes, but loved to play the guitar and loved to sing. And I remember that sophomore year, it was pretty funny. Towards the spring, she said, well, this weekend, my band and I are going to be performing out near the grass docks, and we're going to have our CDs available. And if you want to purchase those, they'll be $5 a piece. And it was just like, I had heard her play and I had heard her band play, and they were plenty loud and they had plenty of style, um, but they weren't really good yet. And then by her senior year, she had a similar concert. And all I can tell you, Morgan, is there had been a little bit of a transformation in 2 years.
Hmm.
And she took more music classes, but I think a lot of it was just she and her group of young men that played together and modeled themselves after other performers. And, I had her that year also in AP Environmental Science. And then she graduates and goes to NYU. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So the last time we got together with Maggie was at a concert maybe 3 summers ago down in Portland.
Hmm.
And it was pretty cool to see her performing before thousands
Yeah.
of spectators. So, and that's one of the things about education, you just never know. And you never tell a student that, well, you're not going to make a living doing that.
Absolutely.
And I never did tell her
Yeah.
that, but you might have been tempted
Yeah.
because it didn't sound too great in the beginning,
Yeah.
but it was pretty good by your senior year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bill. We're right at the 24-minute mark, so we can wrap things up. I guess one last question, and something that I ask all of the guests here. It doesn't have to be a super clean, precise answer, but do you have a personal favorite artist? And if so, who is that?
Okay, I've got to think for a second. Would probably be Winslow Homer or Andrew Wyeth,
Awesome.
because they tend to capture in their paintings um, things that make me feel whole,
Hmm.
the way they look at the natural world. And so it would be either of those
It's a great response.
painters. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If you would like more information about the museum, you can find it on our website, museum.bates.edu. And if you want to keep up to date on all of the happenings at the museum, you can follow us on Instagram at Bates Museum of Art on Instagram. Thank you so much.